Wymondham Abbey was built soon after the Norman conquest with stone shipped directly from France. Indeed, the whole atmosphere of the church is steeped in the French monastic tradition, and until the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII, Wymondham Abbey was twice the size you now see. One doesn't immediately think of a magnificent church like this as a likely battleground, but that's precisely what it was in the 15th century, in a long-running dispute between the Benedictine monks who built the abbey and the parishioners of Wymondham who worshipped here. And the main reason for that long-running antagonism, it lasted for nearly 300 years, was the bells. The parishioners loved the sound of the bells and took delight in their frequent ringing, but the monks complained that the enthusiastic campanologists were ruining their quiet meditation. The result of the feud was the building of a second tower, paid for by the parishioners themselves, where their peals could ring out unrestrained. But the second tower of Wymondham Abbey has a much more sinister history than a dispute over bells. In the middle of the 16th century, one William Kett was hanged from the bell tower. He and his brother had led the peasants' revolt after local landowners turned them off the land around Wymondham. The local people rose up under the Kett's leadership to tear down the fences and hedges that had just been erected. Kett's Oak, where many of the protest meetings took place, still stands to this day. Kett was finally hanged in 1549. On what was once common land now stands the Wymondham Leisure Centre, our home for the day, and we've attracted literally hundreds of people from as far as 50 miles away. So let's now discover what the people of this part of Norfolk have brought to show our experts.
Do you know, the most extraordinary thing when you're working on valuations, inventories, that sort of thing,
yeah,
you can nearly always tell the date of marriages in a family. And what normally gives the game away is the date of the toast rack.
is that so? Oh.
They were the standard wedding presents.
Yeah.
So was this one a wedding present?
No. This I bought on this market, this, the other side of Norwich.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
How long ago did you get it?
I bought it about 13 or 14 years ago.
Now, one of the great problems with toast racks is that they are quite fragile.
Yes.
And you always have to check very, very carefully all the different sections. And in fact, there, somebody has soldered that up with lead.
Yeah, I noticed that, yes.
And unfortunately, that already has broken away. Can you see how
Yes,
that...
in fact, we never use it because it's so fragile.
In fact, with toast racks, you very rarely get one that hasn't been repaired. But it's important that it be well restored.
Yes.
It's a George III one, and was actually made in Birmingham. There's the Birmingham anchor there.
Oh, Birmingham, was it?
You've got the head of George III just there.
Yeah.
And it was made in 1813.
Oh.
So what did you pay for it in this
£4.
Today, you would have to think in terms of about £500–600.
No. Good God. Really?
Yes.
That's true.
But what about the soup ladle? Now,
that's an even more interesting story. I
what
bought
happened with
this
that?
out of a box containing a load of kitchen equipment and so on. It was bent completely double and it was black. And the box was being sold as a box for, I think it was £5. I said, oh, I don't want that. I said, I'll just have this old spoon. How much? And he said £1.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Again, it's George III.
Uh-huh.
In this case, it's 1810.
Oh.
It has got a problem. Can you see, if I just turn it like that, how there's a hollowed out section
Yes,
there?
I do see that, yes.
Catching it in the light.
Yeah.
And what's happened, of course, selling the family silver. Often when people sold in the past, they specified that their crest, coat of arms was to be removed.
I see. Yeah.
And so that's been taken out. It's not a good thing to find. It does obviously affect the value. Even with the erasure there, one would be thinking today in terms of about £150.
Really? Oh, that's jolly good. Thank you very much.
Now, you didn't intend to show this to me, did you?
No, I didn't. I happened to be wearing it on my jumper, and yours was the shortest cube, so we got a ticket for it.
Oh, marvellous. Now, you must tell me how you came by it.
My grandfather was trainer to a Count Boborensky in Russia, a racehorse trainer, before the war. And he rode occasionally for the Tsar, and he gave it to my grandmother.
Oh, nice.
And it's come down the family that way.
That's marvellous. And you wear it a lot, I think.
Yes, I just happened to be wearing it today.
Yes. Well, look, I mean, the moment you showed it to me, it was perfectly obvious that it was Russian because it has a very distinctive little safety clasp here, which stops you pricking your finger on the pin. Mm-hmm. And that's a very good clue to something that it might be even more exciting than that. And it's actually not just a Russian brooch, but it's a very distinguished Russian brooch. It's made by Karl Fabergé, who was court jewelers to the Tsar and Tsarina of Russia.
Oh, that's wonderful. The man with the eggs.
That's the one, absolutely. And it's set with diamonds and a single ruby, and it's in the Art Nouveau taste. It's got a stylized flower, and here's a cabochon ruby. But the important thing about it at the back, it's signed here. There's a little signature on the gold work, which makes it absolutely certain that it is by Fabergé. It's an early one from the Moscow workshops.
Yes.
Now, what on earth do you think that something like that would be worth, given that it's made by the chap that made the imperial Easter eggs for the last Tsar and Tsarina?
I'd have no idea. To me, it was a very lovely gold brooch. I had no idea it was a Fabergé.
Yes. Well, if I told you that you should insure it for £5,000, there we are.
That is wonderful.
It is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful one for me to discover here, actually.
Oh, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I've always
Wonderful.
treasured it, and it'll be even more precious now.
Wonderful.
This is a most charming picture. Have you had it for a long time?
No, 12 months. I admired it, and the gentleman died,
Right.
and they gave it to me.
Well, I think it's the most lovely gift and a great memento of your
yes,
friend, because
yes.
it's by Thomas Worsley. Do you
Yes.
know anything about him?
No.
He was born in 1829 and died in 1876. He was a painter of flowers and fruit, but he really only started that from 1850 onwards. Before that, he was a Japaner, which is a man who paints on papier-mâché. I don't think you can fault any of the detail. It's just so beautifully painted, and the real beauty is the flowers, the primula and the bluebell. It's just, to me, exquisite. It's like a photograph. And then, of course, you go on to the nest and the little eggs. This is painted in 1856, and this was absolutely the right time for him. This is when he decided to break from being a painter of papier-mâché to concentrating on still lifes. And he was tremendously well known for doing this sort of thing. And I think what people like today, as they did in 1856, is the sheer beauty and the sheer quality of such a picture. I mean, I think that if it appeared at auction, it would make between £4,000 and £6,000. I think it would. And you should think about insuring it for something like £6,000.
It's a treasure to me.
It is.
Yes.
And I can see you can never tire of it.
Oh, no, it's beautiful.
Eric? Hello. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt, but I found something so wonderful. You've got to come and look.
That's busy, isn't it?
Excuse me.
Goodness me, somebody's spent a lot of time on that.
All that fine work up there.
Amazing. The man had the patience of a saint to do all this, didn't he?
What do you think it would have been done with?
Well, just with an ordinary little knife.
Just whittled.
Just scratch away there with a needle almost, isn't it?
And then you put lamp
probably,
black in.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was
Lamp
actually.
black.
Yes, I mean a sailmaker's needle would do the job, wouldn't it? I mean,
This is a very wide picture, isn't it?
It will be brightly coloured too and new.
Really?
As you can see the greens, the browns here, colouring here, and if you look at the base, see the
look.
colours?
Oh yes, you can see how traces of the original colour.
When that horn was white, and these bright primary colours would look like a rainbow.
It would, wouldn't it?
And then you rub the lamp black in, and over the years, it's actually shrunk minutely, which has forced that out, and gives that sort of raised effect to the surface.
Just notice.
Just a wonderful thing. Just a
There's a hot look. You got a date? Or 1771.
Certainly was longer ago than my grandfather.
Yes. I'm just wondering. Oh, it is. Look, the city of New York.
New York.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that adds
Gosh,
a
that adds-
fascinating
that puts
dimension to it, doesn't it?
Well, if you were to find something like that in an auction, what would you expect it to be?
Because of the American connection, I think I'd just double it. You see, initially I would have said £1,000, but because of the American connection.
Sorry, steady.
No, I mean it's a very good piece, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the American connection is going to add at least 50%, if not more. I'd like to have a quick word with Hilary, if you don't mind.
This is the piece that intrigued me. This is what we call a bellarmine. We've had these on the programme a number of times, but always German ones. Particularly interesting thing about this is a very early and a rare English one, made by Dwight's factory in Fulham in the end of the 17th century. It's lost its handle. Was it dug up out of the ground?
Yes, outside where they built an extension to the house, so it'd be by the back door of the original building.
By the back door, that's terribly interesting.
Found a big lump of clay.
Was it? Often in the 17th century and even into the early 18th century, they called these witches' bottles, and they buried them with nails and all sorts of things down inside as a sort of a thing against the witches to stop them coming in the door, underneath the doorstep. And when they're found in that way, they obviously were used to keep witches out. And did it keep the witches out of the house?
I presume so.
Some of them have actual nails inside. Has this got any?
If you tip it out, there's a couple left in.
It's got nails. My golly, actual nails, little iron nails. Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah.
That was their purpose. I've never found one myself with them in it, but that's very exciting. I think he's a marvellous chap, even without the handle. He's a rare little piece. Any idea what the value is?
None at all, no.
He's going to be about £1,000 in value. That's because he's English. If he were a German one, much less value. Yeah. But he's a terribly, terribly rare English one. So look after him and bury them again under the doorstep and keep the witches out, won't you?
I was just saying to the lady that a normal skirmisher of that type would make up to £1,000. I can see this because of the American connection. It's dated 1771, being worth almost double that amount because of the American connection. Could you imagine?
I would have said, well, it should certainly be worth more than double that. I mean, I think it could fetch as much as 10,000.
Really?
Now, that may seriously. Well, I mean, the ship Susan teeth, which are whale's teeth inscribed Nantucket, and a good deal later than this, I mean, they fetch £20,000 or £30,000 apiece. And no, it is a significant
object.
A significant object. It's absolutely fantastic.
Well, it's a very smart piece of furniture.
It is. I've played chess on it with my wife's grandmother.
So it's a family piece?
Oh, yes.
Well, there's a lot about it which gives us a fairly accurate dating, quite frankly, because it's such a, as I say, a very smart item, very fashionable at its time, very expensive. Therefore, it was made in the latest style, and we would call it Regency, not the political Regency, but the period from about 1790 to 1820, when the Prince of Wales actually governed fashion of this high-style type. First off, you've got the basic drop-leaf work table, standing on a tapering column, very classical, onto a quatrefoil platform and 4 scroll legs. Now, 2 or 3 things immediately strike you. Firstly, the brass inlay. Now, in 1815, Louis Le Guigneur came across from Paris as soon as the war was over, brought his workshops and started inlaying brass again in what had previously been buhl fashion earlier in the 18th century. Went out of fashion, came back again, and then, of course, it was bright, it was sparkly, this rosewood was very dark. It was a magnificent look. You've got here, quite interesting, a little black and gold corrugation, which is very, very powerful, very dramatic look to the knee. That curl-over knee you will also find after 1810, 1815. And then all this metal mount, which is cast and applied in a band. Here's a good piece here. Beautiful quality. And then, of course, the drawers. The base one here. No handles, it's a secret pull-out here. And then you mentioned chess. There it is. And backgammon. And there's the chessboard. Satinwood and rosewood. And when this was new, the satinwood was nearly white, and the rosewood was black. And it must have looked really quite dramatic. Now then, we've got to look at a value for you. Have you ever had it valued?
When we got it about 4 years ago, I think it was suggested at about £2,500 for insurance.
I think you've got to increase that, quite honestly. That would cost you much nearer £6,000 today. If you went into a good shop, you'd have to pay £5,000 or £6,000 to replace it.
That's
so
very
there's
nice.
your insurance value.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
indeed.
Pleasure.
Well, is it a constable?
That's what I want us to decide.
Us?
Us.
But what have you already decided?
That I don't really know. We've had it in the family for 60 years, and every so often when there's some constable stuff in the newspapers, you sort of get it out and have a look and think, oh, yes it is, no it isn't. And I think it could be.
If it is constable, it is worth at least £3 or £4 million.
If it is.
But it's only a sketch.
If it is.
You know, the sketches, I mean, constable sketches are by far the best things he ever did.
Really?
I mean, that is where his vigour is. When he's trying hard to go on the academy walls, he loses all that
That's
freshness.
right.
It isn't a constable.
It isn't.
No, it isn't a constable.
Right.
Then why am I saying so firmly it isn't?
Tell me.
Because, as you said, it's a sketch. As you said, he paints with a wonderful vigour.
Yeah.
And although this is a very painterly picture and painted by a real artist, it lacks that energy. And of course, even the church on the skyline and this wonderful dappled light here, I think are very beautiful. It's a bit weak here, and it's sort of unresolved over here.
Well, it's totally unfinished there.
And yes, it's by somebody, as most British landscape artists of this period were somehow or another influenced by Constable. It's influenced by Constable. But it simply falls flat, and you can't excuse it by saying it's an unresolved sketch, because those are the best things that Constable ever did.
Yes, okay.
But I still think it's a beautiful painting.
Yeah. There's possibly a boat there, and that's possibly the same setting that comes out of the Haywain on the right-hand side of the Haywain. I don't know.
It did have a sticker on the back.
It did years ago.
Years ago, yes.
Saying what?
J. Constable R.A. and Spidery Black
But
Rifle.
ever since Constable lived and died,
there've
been people desperate to make paintings Constable.
Yeah. In 1822-23, he had a bad year, and he was trying to do a big sketch for the lock, right? That sketch has never been found. And what he actually said in one of his letters was that he had now decided to make it a vertical picture instead of a horizontal picture, which is what he had been doing since 1802.
Yes.
There, right? That vertical picture is what's known as the Morrison one. The two pictures after that, which are locks, are both copies of the Morrison one. They're 1828, 1833. They are horizontal again, and they go roughly from this tree, and they go further over to the right. So my question is, when he was doing the missing horizontal sketch, 1822-23 period, which is missing, nobody's yet found it, was that horizontal to this side, or was it to that side? And if there's also in his correspondence a lot about him suddenly going into the sky.
But when you think of how Constable studied and studied skies and produced that magic, and when you see this sky, which is well painted, but ultimately a bit laboured, it doesn't quite have the airiness.
Depends how far you are away from it, as it does on most of his.
Yes, but...
And also you notice on his that there are about 4 different ways in which he does his skies.
And you have to look at the paint.
Yes.
Because in the end, is it the paint that counts? Is this the paint of Constable? You see, you have approached it academically. I approach it visually.
Right, yes.
I'm interested in the paint the man put on, the human being within that paint, the desire, the energy, and everything else, and I can't see it here. Now, neither of us are the greatest Constable experts in the world, but they're not far away, they're in the Tate Gallery. And to resolve this argument, we shall go to them and ask them.
Right, when?
As soon as I get back to London,
Excellent.
we'll be all right.
When did you buy these?
Well, my father bought them on the day war broke out in a pawn shop in London. He saw them in the window and liked them, bought them, came home with them.
And what did he pay for?
He paid £5 for them.
£5. Now, do you know what they are?
Well, we call them marriage cups. I don't know any more about them than that.
Yes, that's fair enough, because there are in fact two ways in which you can use these. As a marriage cup, what you did was to flick her upside down like that.
Yeah.
Fill to the brim, and fill that section to the brim. And then the wife or the bride would drink out of that section whilst you were drinking out of that. And you hope nobody spilt anything on the way. But there was another way in which they could be used as well, and that was as a wager cup. And you start off in the same way. This full to the brim, that's full to the brim. But then, I think probably need to, yes, that'll be better. You held it above your head, just with one hand, and then you had to drink the contents of this section without using your other hand and without spilling anything from the top. And I've tried this. And what tends to happen, you're concentrating so much on not letting that sort of flip that you forget about what's happening up at the top. And you suddenly get this rather wet, cold feeling. And of course you've lost the wager. The origin of these goes back into the 17th century. With what we've got here, we've got some really quite exciting looking marks there. Sort of marks which are confusing, because what we've got is over here what really looks rather like an Augsburg mark, a sort of pineapple.
Yes.
So straight away you get excited, you think it's going to be 17th century Augsburg. The other mark we've got here, the N, lovely Gothic looking N, and again one would think it's going to be a very early, perhaps a date letter, that sort of idea. In fact, that is the mark of Neersheimer, the factory in Germany, where they were made at the end of the last century. And they were brought into England by a chap called Bertold Müller. The extraordinary thing is people are collecting Müller as though he was a maker, but in fact he was an import agent. So, have you thought what they might be worth today?
No, I've no idea.
They're very collectible today, and really one's got to think in terms of them selling in excess of £1,000 each.
Heavens.
And you would have to insure them for at least £3,000.
Good heavens.
So the day war broke out proved to be a very good day for your family.
Yes, because Mother was furious. Mother said he should have been buying blankets and cans of food.
Sensible things.
Yeah, sensible.
Oh, I like it.
When he came over.
But thank you so much for bringing them in. That's
thank
lovely.
you very much for telling me.
Wherever we go on the Antiques Roadshow, there's always some local association with the world of art and antiques. It might be a school of painters or a group of cabinet makers, but in this part of East Anglia, it's very much the potters, because at Lowestoft, not far from here, Chris, there was one of the earliest porcelain factories. I love that story of the beginning of porcelain in this country. It's very romantic, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yes. They struggled really hard to make porcelain for 10 years before Lowestoft themselves got started. In this area, the Bow factory had established a market, and so the proprietors at Lowestoft thought they would try and get in on the act. It was really a sort of a butcher, baker, candlestick maker start, because the proprietors were a blacksmith, a bricklayer, and a tenant farmer. And it seems incredible that they produced something as beautiful as this between 1757 and 1759.
And still at a pioneering time when the making of porcelain was regarded as very difficult, and there were lots of failures, weren't there?
Absolutely, and at this factory there were many failures in the early years, and early survivors are very, very rare.
Now, what are these? I haven't seen these before.
These are birth tablets, and I think most were made by workers at the factory for their own families. Certainly this one, Mary Redgrave, 1761, and this one, Martha Redgrave, 1765. The Redgrave family did work at the factory.
And these are unique to Lowestoft, are they?
They're unique to Lowestoft and extremely sought after by collectors.
The bowl?
The bowl is a lovely piece because of the shipping interest. And surprisingly, at Lowestoft, very few wares seem to have shipping scenes on them.
It's delightful because of its simplicity, isn't it? And what better than to find something that was actually made, for a pub in Wymondham?
For a pub, the Rising Sun in Wymondham. And there's still an advert in the Norwich Mercury, which he took out in 1756, advertising himself. And I like to think that he had, maybe 10 or 12 of those on the bar. Wonderful things to drink out of.
You can almost taste it now.
About 15 years ago, we bought a house, and walking round, my wife was so taken by the ornaments in the garden that we negotiated a price for the house plus the complete contents of the garden,
right,
which included this particular piece here.
I think this is a very exciting piece, partly because it sort of breaks new ground. It's also because it brings to life in a very powerful way modernism in sculpture in the 20th century. And when we look at modern British sculpture, it all begins really with three people. It begins with Frank Dobson, Gaudiya Breshka, and above all else, Epstein, working before the First World War in a very powerful cubist, revolutionary style that comes as much from African art as it does from the European classical tradition. And this very chunky approach to carving became a language of modernism that carried on through the 20th century.
Yes,
now, if this was 1910, it would be a really exciting discovery. I fear it isn't. We're looking at the 30s, when this had become part of the language of modern sculpture in Britain. What one's got to do with a piece like this is, I suspect, try and find out more. It is probably by a follower of that group I mentioned. It's still a very exciting piece, and it may be that one can eventually attach a name to it.
My wife was so taken with it, really, that this was why we bought the whole contents of the garden. We didn't really want the other ornaments, but this particular one was so unusual that this is why
I'd like to see the rest.
Well,
go home and fetch them.
Okay, they're even bigger and heavier than these.
Well, maybe seriously, one needs to look at them all, photograph them all, and see what there is.
Yes.
If it's a corpus of work like that, it is definitely identifiable, and therefore potentially, inevitably quite valuable. If one can come up and say, this is by X or Y, it fits into a group of work, it dates from 1932, you're then in the low thousands, depending upon the status of that artist.
Right.
As an anonymous piece, it's a couple of thousand.
Right.
It's a piece of garden art. But it's a great piece, and I'm so pleased to see it. And as I say, I'd love to have it in my garden. I think I'd have bought the house as well.
I inherited this from my grandmother when she died about 5 years ago. And the boy in the pink suit was my great-great-great-grandfather.
What is wonderful about this is that the family have obviously posed for this sitting long before the days of photography or anything outside really could be done other than the very formal portraits that we see done by people like Gainsborough. But here, instead of using that technique, what's happened is they've found somebody to embroider a picture of themselves, and they've had their faces delicately painted in, and I'm sure, looking at them, they are so definite that they are absolute portrait likenesses, and that's very rare. Because what we have here is, of course, is silk. The whole background is silk, and very often you find you get a tension between the embroidery and the silk, and they pull away from each other. You have to watch that, because once it starts to go, it's the devil's own job to get it back together again. What I love is this sort of mad small dog at the bottom here, completely out of proportion. Children with rather large heads. But it's a good family group, and it's a lovely oval frame. And I think if something like that was to come up in auction with all your family records with it, you'd be talking, easily 600 to 800, maybe up to £1,000. It's a super object.
When were they collected? Long before the war, because as far as I know, they were in a house in London that got bombed out during the war. My mother's aunt's house, and it got brought down to the country to look after it, really, and there it stayed.
Yeah, because they were being made to be collector's items, as well as little souvenirs. People did have collections, and they would ask friends to bring them back a present when they go somewhere different, somewhere exotic. Goss is the best maker, really, by far. The quality of the porcelain really is super. Goss is perhaps, in a way, looked down on by serious porcelain collectors as being only a making with these little silly novelties.
Yes.
But when you see how well they're made, the modelling is good, the quality is light potting, beautiful porcelain clay. So, and Goss really were a superb factory, but had a market for something that was extremely profitable. and much imitated. So the Goss mark occurs on the best ones, the hawk. I mean, now rarity comes into the value a great deal. Most of these little pieces can still be collected relatively inexpensively, starting at a few pounds. The non-Goss ones start at normally between about £3 and £5. Goss you can rarely find even the simple things for less than about a tenner now. And when you get the rarer shapes, the lobster pot would be about £40.
Would it?
Some models of Goss can be.
Two of those there.
We've got a couple of those, so never see going to add up. Some of the rare models of cottages fetch many hundreds of pounds. Some Goss fetches thousands of pounds for the very rare pieces. I don't recognise any of the extremely rare ones here, but you've got a great collection.
No, and I don't think we've left any at home either. I think this is a fair representation of what we've got.
First of all, I'd like to know what you know about this. Oh.
Not a great deal. That was actually my father's, but he bought it from my grandfather, who got it from an auction about 30 years ago.
About 30 years ago, yes.
Something like that.
And do you know who to buy or anything like that?
No, I haven't got a clue.
Well, it's actually signed AJM 1905. AJM is Alfred Munnings, who was a very famous president of the Royal Academy, famous painter of horses, and as a young man was here in Norwich painting market scenes and everything else. So it should be by Munnings, but it's a fake. And it's a very... Oh, so I'm sorry to disappoint you.
No, it's all right.
But I'm not here because I want to disappoint you. I want to point out that I believe there is a great tradition in East Anglia of faking Munnings. Not so much the oil paintings, where there are fakes, but also lots of drawings, and I think it's still going on today.
My dad always thought that was a Munnings because of the initials, and he always did say, I bet that's a Munnings, I bet that, but he's passed away now. But I always wanted to, you know, get it checked for him, sort of thing. But obviously, it's...
Well, at least you're hearing the disappointing news, not him. But it's no, because Munnings, when you look at this is so clumsy. And when you look at, if you go to the museum or whatever and look at real Munnings, it's so beautifully painted.
Well, it's very... I still like it anyway.
Yeah, good.
What I like about them very much is they represent the history of motoring, our attitude to motoring, and how it was a very decorative pastime, hobby. And it's surprising to me the range of badges there were concerned with motoring clubs. Where on earth did you get them all from?
Well, some were inherited from my family, who were in the garage trade up until the 1950s, and others I've added since.
What is so interesting to me is this whole range which you seem to have of the AA.
Yes, it was.
I mean, we all know the very boring badge you get now with two simple A's. It wasn't always thus. I think most of us know the yellow version. But of course, it starts much earlier, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, yes. The AA was formed in 1905, I believe, so that was one of the earliest badges.
So this is certainly pre-First World War, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
You've also got the RAC series. It's a very good group. As you know, I mean, some badges are incredibly rare. One can pay hundreds of pounds for, or even more, for the really wonderful, obscure, rarities. But even so, the run of AA ones you've got here, one's looking at £300 or so. The run of RAC ones, a bit less, but about the same. The individual badges soon mount up. I'm looking at £1,000 here.
Really?
Perhaps a bit more. £1,000, £1,500. It's a really good, well-assembled collection of accessible material.
This is absolutely amazing. For me, this series has been a series of firsts all the way along. And this particular thing here is the earliest item that I have ever handled on the Antiques Roadshow. This is a German devotional manuscript dating from the late part of the 14th century, about 1380, 1390, 1400. In fact, 50 years at least before the use of printing with movable type in the Western world. It's quite incredible. It's beautifully illuminated here, wonderful arabesques and twirls all the way around the initial letters, including one which has actually been burnished. The burnishing has worn off, but you can actually see what the original glory of this wonderful, dear little manuscript would be. It's an absolute darling. You must tell me where you got it from.
From my late uncle.
Your late uncle, and have you any idea where he collected it from?
I think it possibly in Bath, from an antique shop there.
Yes. No, that's absolutely splendid. But imagine my surprise when I saw initially the binding which is mid to late 19th century and in such appalling condition. But to have such a wonderfully noble little thing inside. Do you have it valued at all? Do you have it valued for insurance?
First time anybody's seen it, really.
Well, I think with a little more work, I could probably come up with a better date on it and a better figure. But I think that it's certainly going to be worth in the region of £2,000.
Thank you very much. Very nice.
Well, thank you for bringing it along. Great surprise for me.
Do you know anything about the age of them at all?
Well, I know the star was, there were 3 belonging to my grandmother, but which was Victorian, presumably.
Yes.
But
did they make a tiara? Perhaps not. Hair ornaments certainly like this.
I know it was divided up when she died amongst the 3 children.
Yes.
And my father got that one.
It's rather a shame that they were divided in a way, because they, in a sense, they are a suite of jewellery. Sometimes they come in 4s and 5s, and Lord Snowdon's mother, the Countess of Ross, used to wear diamond stars on her back rather than her hair, which is rather good. A chic way of doing it. You can see this is very beautifully sprung on its hair ornament, and it would wobble in the hair, and the idea is that you were sort of shot with a constellation of diamond ornaments in your Edwardian coiffure. It's beautifully made. The diamonds are set in silver and gold, and I suppose one could sort of give it a date of about 1890. I won't discuss the value at the moment, but it's valuable for very different reasons to this jewel, which is a completely different character in a sense. What do you know about that one?
Absolutely nothing.
Well, that's a start. I mean, it's actually not as old as it would have you believe. I mean, it gives the impression of being a 16th century jewel, but it's somewhat a wolf in sheep's clothing for the best sort of reasons. In the 19th century, they thought that the decorative arts had really fallen to its lowest possible pitch, and the only thing they could do was to look to the past for inspiration. And this particular jeweller has looked at a 16th century prototype, probably a design by Hans Holbein for a jewel, and has made what we call a revivalist jewel out of it. It's decorated with enamel and set with foiled emeralds. The emeralds are not a particularly strong colour, and they've been backed with foil, painted foil, to intensify the colour. What is certain about it is that it was once a pendant, and this brooch fitting is later, and it would be quite nice to remove that in a sense, and it would have a pendant loop from which it would hang, and it would answer the pearl drop here and make the whole composition much more satisfactory. And
I had a nasty feeling that I had the brooch put on there.
Well, I think we can get you out of trouble. I think we can easily get those fittings removed, and it's a good idea in a way. But anyway, they are valuable for 2 very different reasons. I think their value's roughly the same. I think something like £1,850 for this one, and I think about £2,000 for that, which is because it's what everybody wants to have, and it's an easy jewel to wear, and not everybody wants to wear diamonds today. But they're very, very interesting, and thanks for bringing them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I haven't had the pleasure of having on this programme, or in fact having seen for some time, a better 3-pedestal dining table than this one. It's an exemplary one, straight out of the book. I mean, the column, I want to look down, you don't have to play bears now. The idea of this wonderful, almost a Cupid's bow, to a 4-splay leg instead of 3-splay is in itself a mark of wonderful quality. You've got a reeded leg ending in these wonderful casters with huge wheels and this lovely ankle to the brass collar there. Just superb. I mean, this is 1795, 1800, and topping it as you come up is that gun barrel stone. Now, the problem with all these things is that the tops over the years have been altered. They were either too big or they weren't the right colour. They've been stripped and polished. And I think something has actually happened to this one. If you could pull your end away, right, we'll look at the underneath. But first off, the first thing that you'll notice is this border here, this edge. Now that moulding is an 1830, 1840 moulding. And I think that that's reworked. It's a slightly different colour. There's just something about it. It should have a reeded edge which would match the legs. If you can tip yours up. Okay. Now you see underneath, brilliant, wonderful colour running up until here. And you can see where someone has actually used a stripper, a solvent, and that's run underneath, which is a shame, Now, did they just put a moulding on, or no, they didn't. They actually reduced it in width. This table was another 4 inches wide, and you can tell that. You've got a little key in there, like one of these, little tongue, right? And there's one running off into nowhere.
Yes, I see
So,
that.
right, the top was up there. Fabulous thing. Let's put it down and look at it now commercially. This is obviously a family table.
It is, yes.
Right. Of this quality, once upon a time, there would have been another pedestal.
Yes.
And then, with that, 3 leaves. So it's been in the family for how long? I mean,
Well, it's very difficult to say. Certainly, I would have thought for 100 years. But my family actually came from Glasgow and then moved to Liverpool because they were all in shipping.
It's the quality of a northern counties one anyway, or northern area. I mean, it's superb. The timber is so heavy.
Yes.
Just lovely. This is a shame. However, let's look at it as it is. Even with a cut top, with those 3 marvellous bases, then this table is worth today on the open market £25,000–30,000.
Really? Well, I had it valued in 1982,
right,
and it was then valued at 2,250.
Gosh, I wish I'd have been around then.
Well, we end this extraordinary Antiques Roadshow really where we began, with something of the history of the church. Just take a close look at this. It appears to be simply a charred piece of wood, which indeed it is, but what a story behind it. This is part of the stake upon which one of the first of the English Protestant martyrs was burned to death. His name was John Hooper. He was the Bishop of Gloucester, and he'd incurred the wrath of Queen Mary Tudor by being among the first bishops to approve the divorce of her father, Henry VIII, from her mother, Catherine of Aragon. And so when Mary came to the throne, she, a Catholic, took her vengeance in this particularly bitter way. Something of the cruel history of the 16th century here. The bishop died on the stake on Saturday, the 9th of February, 1555. Well, that's it from this roadshow here in Norfolk. Next week, we're off to a palatial setting in Oxfordshire, and I very much hope that you'll join us then. So until then, from all of us here, goodbye.
The Antiques Roadshow regrets that it's unable to give valuations by post.